Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jude and I'm here to give you a review of this book called The Deep Places. It is a memoir of illness and discovery by Douthat. And I'm going to tell you 5 takeaways that I had from this book. Number 1, who is Douthat? He's a New York Times columnist. He's a media fellow at the Institute for Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America. He converted to Catholicism at age 17, and he lives in New Haven, Connecticut with his wife and his 4 children. The dream realized. So living in Washington, D.C., and always wanting to move back to his roots, both Ross and his wife were from Connecticut. So they yearned for the life they remembered as a child, for deep woods and colonial houses, birches and evergreens, old stone walls, and blizzards. That was quoting his book. They found a 1790s farmhouse on 3 acres, which had a barn, a guest cottage, and a pool, and it was close to town. But the property needed a lot of work. The main house was in good shape, though. So it was at the inspection of the house when Ross watched a family of deer running through the meadow. That was the summer of 2015. Number 3, the nightmare begins. And just a prelude, I had seen the author give a presentation. And he said, this book is kind of like a Stephen King horror book, because what you think it's picturesque, and what he thought it was going to be the life that he always wanted, to be able to go back to his roots and raise his children in a beautiful property. But he awoke one rainy morning with a stiff neck and a red swelling and a painful lymph node. So he went to a walk-in clinic and he was told it was just a boil, and he was given a mild antibiotic. So over the next 2 weeks, his neck felt intermittently stiff and painful, and he developed a vibration in his head. The pain continued to get worse, and he experienced stabbing pains. He thought he was having a heart attack or a stroke. He had such constriction around his and across his chest, just terrible symptoms. And he rushed to the ER. He had all the scans and the tests done, and they came up with nothing. Now, it isn't uncommon, the more that Ross describes his experience, and you hear about other people with Lyme disease, that sometimes they're recommended and referred to see a psychiatrist. But the pain is real. And I wondered, because this was suggested to me through a site that said, do you want to read a good Catholic book? So knowing that he was Catholic, I was waiting for the chapter or chapters that discussed where his faith was in all of this pain. And it went on for years and years and years. So we as Catholics know, I'm a cradle Catholic from a little child. We talk about pain and suffering and offering those things up. And he writes, was God there? He was supposed to be way up above, enthroned on high, not mucking around in the underground with broken things underfoot and strange machinery half visible. But maybe his emissaries were down there. Maybe prayers were more effective once you were down there. At a certain point in this period, I think in the spring of 2018, I went to confession in our parish church in New Haven. Not a terribly frequent occurrence for me in normal times, and even more infrequent during the illness, because the sins I had to confess were mostly just anger and despair and anger, the same depressing round. Coming out of the confessional that day, kneeling to say my 10 Hail Marys penance in a nearby pew, I realized it had been some time since I directed any begging heavenward. And I thought to punctuate the last Ave with a plea for help, a self-composed adaptation. Holy Mary, Mother of God, intercede for me in your mercy, that I may be healed of this disease, freed of this sickness, and restored to health. So he goes on to say that he had the same sensation after this happened that he did when he would take the antibiotics, when he would take the other treatments. There was a stirring inside that caused a change in his body. So it was interesting to note that this experience, going to confession, had that same effect on him that the treatments did. And then a little later, he goes on to say, in the beginning, only prayers to Mary seemed to have any effect, but then eventually there were reactions when I asked specific saints for help, beginning with my own namesakes, and then others on their feast day or some other moment that suggested them to me. And not only saints, pushing the boundaries a little further. I sometimes asked for help from departed relatives on the chance that they had cleared purgatory by now and were in the elevator going up. And in a few cases, a great-grandfather, a grandmother, a relative on his wife's side. So that was interesting. It was almost like his body reacting to those prayers, to those intercessions, was causing a change in his condition. So number 5. So even though I hoped to hear more about his faith journey throughout, I really am grateful for a deeper understanding of Lyme disease. Of course, I've heard of people and their cases with Lyme, and I've always had dogs, and I always pick ticks off of them, and they're very difficult to dispose of. They seem to just be indestructible. But really listening to his story and knowing the pain, the chronic pain that he went through year after year after year, and he did get COVID, and he said that, it was hard on him. It was, as usually colds and flus were from his children being in school. They would bring these different things home, and when he got sicknesses, common colds and so forth, it was much harder. The body went into attack mode, and it really gives you a whole different perspective on a chronic illness and how difficult it is to live with pain and suffering every single day. Let me end this video because I think it's beautiful, so beautifully written, and you'll get a flavor of how well Ross Douthat writes. I am writing this story in part for those chronically suffering, more numerous than the healthy ever realize, to give them hope that their condition can be changed, even if it can't be eliminated, that they might be able to save their own lives, even if they feel abandoned by doctors, that they might, like me, be able to get, not fully well yet, but better, genuinely better. So that's the takeaway that I have reading this story. The fact that we know that there has been amazing medical developments and accomplishments and efforts that have been reached to help us to live a healthy life and a well life, but there's still so many things that have to be discovered and have to be acknowledged. So I highly recommend you reading The Deep Places by Ross Douthat. Are you a Lyme disease sufferer? Are you suffering from a chronic illness? Please put in the comments. Maybe you have found relief somehow. That's one thing that Ross describes in the book, is just the healing that goes on even when you exchange with someone else about your condition, that you're not alone, that your voice needs to be heard, and you're not going crazy when you have found that maybe your pain can go from a 10 being the worst to a 9 by trying something. And that's another takeaway from the book. The fact that if you're a chronic sufferer of an illness, you want hope. You want hope that you can feel better, even if it's just a little bit. You learn to live with it, but you're hoping that there will be a day that something will work, that your body will balance itself. So my friends, thanks so much for joining me. I'd love to know what you're reading right now. Do you have any suggestions for me for future videos? A great book that you have read, a great Catholic read? I'd love to know. So until next time, peace and love. Keep reading.